This is a tutorial for a scoring helper sheet that was developed. It's called iDASH, Intercollegiate Dressage Association Scoring Helper. Is basically set up to help score 12-team shows for the IDA. So we'll go ahead and we'll get started. It's an Excel spreadsheet, so all the functions of this program are linked back and forth. What I'll do is I'll run through the most general parts of the program, discuss what it does and what its limitations are, and then we'll run through an example show. So the first thing to notice on the Excel spreadsheet is that those of you familiar with Excel will notice that there are different sheets, and those are denoted by tabs along the bottom of the page. The sheet you're looking at right now is a tab that's labeled About, so it's the cover page. Then there is another tab which refers to the team registry. Then all the individual tests, they're labeled Training 1, Intro B, Training 3, First Level. Then there's a summary sheet which looks very similar to any sort of score sheet that you would see in a regular dressage show. And then finally there is a team summary sheet which refers to the team standings for the show. So looking at the individual sheets, and I guess starting as you would score a normal show, your first sheet to look at would be the team registry tab, and I'll zoom in a little bit so hopefully you can see it. And one of the things that you'll notice right off the bat is that some of the cells are highlighted in blue. The cells that are highlighted in blue are selectable and editable. You can type whatever you want in those cells. Cells that are not highlighted in blue are locked out. You can't even select them, and that prevents users from accidentally changing the formula or the references that would alter the result of this spreadsheet. So on this first sheet, the team registry, what you'll notice is there's a column on the left which refers to the team name, and here I've got it populated with just a dummy show referring to a collection of teams. And then going across, there will be rider name and rider number for each test and level that's being ridden. So obviously you'll have to go through and name each test and name each level, and then you'll have to name all the riders and their respective numbers for each level or each test that's being ridden. Now you'll notice that this spreadsheet is set up to be a 12-team show. I've got 12 spots for up to 12 teams, and I've got spots for up to 4 riders. If a particular show has a fewer number of teams, then it'll still work just fine, but 12 is the maximum. Also, on an individual team, each team does not have to have 4 riders. It can be split up anyway, and it won't affect the outcome in the least. But a very important thing to consider is that each rider must have a name. The way this is set up, if the rider is not named, then their test will not be scored. Whatever entries you put in for its score will not be totaled, and that team and that rider will not be scored. A number isn't necessary, but the rider name must be entered for that rider. So once you go through and you fill out this spreadsheet, that's pretty much all there is to be done. It's listing the teams and the competitors for the show. So once that's complete, what you'll want to do is start clicking over to the individual tests and reviewing these spreadsheets. And in this particular one, this is training level test 1. And again, there are a lot of blue cells in here, and these are the ones that can be edited. The ones that are not highlighted in blue cannot be edited. And you'll notice if I zoom in to the very top here, this is the training level test 1, and the schools are listed right on across, and the riders are listed on across along with their numbers. So MSUA, which is the MSUA lower training level rider, number 300, that corresponds back to the lower training level test 1 here on the registry sheet. So that's linked automatically. Of the cells that you actually can edit, starting on the left-hand side, this area of the spreadsheet, this big block of blue, is where you put in the particulars of each test. You'll notice there's a column labeled movements, and on this particular test I have 14 movements numbered on this. You'll be required to assign the coefficient for each movement, and that comes off of the USDF score sheets. And then you'll type in the maximum raw score that's available to that, and that will always be 10, but nevertheless you're required to enter that in there anyway. And then down towards the bottom, there are the collective marks, where you have to name each collective mark, enter in the respective coefficient, and then the maximum raw score available right there as well. Now it looks on this particular score sheet that I've got 14 movements listed. If, for example, there was a 15th movement on this particular test, I would go ahead and enter in movement 15. I would enter whatever coefficient it would be, and let's just assume that it's a coefficient of 1. And you'll notice that that gets carried over into the other columns. So this score sheet will automatically expand or contract depending on the number of movements that are entered. Once you enter in the coefficient and the maximum raw score, there is a maximum total score that appears, which incorporates the coefficients, and that is all totaled below for the maximum total score for the test. And that is the number that's used to calculate the rest of the scores as they're entered. So it's very important to enter in the specifics of the test that you would like to score and make sure that that's entered correctly. And that total is a good check, because the USDF score sheets also print a maximum total for that particular test. So when you're done entering the test, if your maximum total points, and for this particular run through it was 250 points, does not match up with the test that you're trying to score, then you've got a problem. You've got to go back and readjust that. For each individual rider, there are the raw scores and the total scores, and I'll delete that line there because I already have some dummy numbers printed in there. There's the raw score and the total score. So on this spreadsheet, and I'll zoom in a little bit closer on this rider 300, these scores that you enter are the raw scores that you receive from the judge. So these are pre-coefficient scores. The program will automatically use the coefficient to calculate the total score. So make sure that when you're entering in these numbers that it is the original raw score. If you have something in the raw score column that's more than 10, then you've got a problem. And again, don't forget to do that down below. The program will go ahead and calculate the subtotal points. It's just a simple addition. There's one more blue cell down here to pay attention to. These are the error points. If there is an error on the test, that error must be entered as a negative. So in this case, let's just say, for example, there was 2 error points. I went in and I entered -2, and you can see that the 158 that this particular rider scored was then reduced to their total of 156. If you enter in a positive for error points, it will add those points on there. So like I said, when you have an error, always enter it as a negative in order to get the correct score. And then the spreadsheet will incorporate all those numbers and calculate a percentage. So that's what the percent score is here. And then also there are 2 tiebreakers that are shown. The first tiebreaker, set up by the IDA rules, is the highest rider position aids in geometry/harmony. And then the second tiebreaker, if a tie still exists after that first tiebreaker, the second tiebreaker is the highest of the cumulative collective marks. According to the rules, there is a third tiebreaker, and that's to be broken by the judge. And I'll show you how to do that here a little bit later in the spreadsheet. Now again, we're looking at the training level test 1, which is the lower level training, and I've zoomed out a little bit so you probably can't see all the individual numbers, but I just randomly entered in a test. Fully populated all the competitors and gave them all fictitious test results. All those results are then totaled down below in a table called preliminary scores and ranking, and this is done automatically. And what happens is each score is named, and you can see here in the blue, each rider is placed. If you look across here, it's pretty standard fare. They're placing the rider number, rider name, the team they belong to, the horse name, which can also be entered up above. It's one of the blue cells. The subtotal of points, the errors, all the particulars of the test. There's also a summary of the tiebreakers around here. And there's also some information here on how the ties are actually broken. And that's what these codes refer to. It's a calculation that goes back and refers to the tiebreakers in order. So in this case, when I look at all the scores down here, I will notice that I've got a 65.833, and I've got another 65.833. I also have a 62.917 and a 62.917. So in this particular test, I had two ties, or two sets of ties, that had to be broken. And when you look at how those ties are broken, for example, looking at the 65.833 and the 65.833, what you'll see, and I'll zoom a little bit farther to the right here so that you can see it, is that the score for the position, aids, geometry, and harmony are the same, but the first rider, the rider on top, had a higher score for their overall collective marks. So in this one, they remained tied after the first tiebreaker, but they were broken by the second tiebreaker. The other tie, which is the 62.917 right here, and this 62.917, they actually had different scores for the positions, aids, geometry, and harmony score. So that was broken by the first tiebreaker. And you can see more detail of that when you scroll on down to the third table, which is all automatic. There's no blue in this at all. And you'll notice on the right-hand side, we have some little subscripts next to each one of those scores. See, I have my two 65.833s right there and the two 62.917s. And then they are assigned accordingly with little footnotes on there. And beneath the table, it spits it out that the tie was broken by which criteria. So in this particular test, we had two ties, and they were broken by separate tie breakers, and that is listed. And this is the spreadsheet, this final ranking and scores. This is the one that's copied into the last spreadsheet that gives the show total. So this shows you an example of how to enter in a test, how to enter in all the scores for the riders, and then when ties occur, how those ties are broken. Now you might be asking yourself, okay, well what if I have a three-way tie? Can the spreadsheet accommodate that? And the answer is yes. And I contrived a situation in intro level test B where there was actually a three-way tie between scores 64.583, 64.583, and a 64.583. In this particular case, there were different position aids, geometry, and harmony scores for each one of those rides. So that tie was broken by the first tiebreaker exclusively. And then when I went down to the summary, you'll notice that there are three of these subscripts or superscripts next to the scores, and there is the corresponding note below that the tie was broken by high rider position, aids, geometry, and harmony. And this would work out even if 2 of those scores were to be broken by the first criteria and the third needed to be broken by the second criteria, it would have the appropriate number next to it referring to how the tie was broken. So it's actually fairly robust, and I went through many different scenarios. Now the last thing that we need to look at in terms of tiebreakers is, what if that tie remains and needs to be broken by the judge? And for that, I contrived a scenario in the training level test 3 where I entered in the test and generated all the dummy scores. And then as it turns out, when I go down to the preliminary scores and ranking table, under the placing, you have all the placings shown up here, but the 2 scores that need to be broken have a comment in here. They say adjust by hand. And when a tie is to be broken by a judge, the rules call for those tests to be taken to the judge, and then the judge makes a decision on which test they preferred. And that's why these cells are blue. So when you get the test back saying that the judge preferred rider 201 over rider 202, remember, the blue ones you can modify by hand, so you would just go ahead and make that change. In this particular case, you're looking at ranking 1, 2, 3. It looks like these are 4, 5 that need to be broken. So let's say that the judge preferred rider 201. I would adjust that ranking to 4 and the second ranking to 5 by hand, and we would be good to go. If you scroll on down, you would see that all the numbers are entered correctly, and then we have a 3 superscript tag, which refers to a tie broken by the judge's decision. Now, if for whatever reason I didn't do that, or I forgot to do that, what would be carried down below is an error message. You can see, and I'll try to zoom in a little bit closer, that those particular riders have error messages entered in within their scores. And if you do not break that tie by hand, then this class cannot be scored completely in the summary page, and the team scores will not be calculated. We'll get to that spreadsheet and it will all be just errors. So if you get to that summary page and you find that there are unresolved errors in there, it's probably the most likely bet that there's an unbroken tie that needs the judge's decision in order to be broken. So let's go back, and there's one final note. I'll go ahead and break this tie by hand. And you'll see that there's actually some fairly interesting equations that are written into these blue cells. If you want to reset that, you can use the drag and drop function on Excel to just drag over your overwritten cells, and it will restore the original equation. So you can use this over and over. Once you have it overwritten by hand, if you had to break a judge or a tie using a judge's decision, you can use a drag and drop function in Excel to restore that for the next show that you want to score. But I'll go ahead and I'll make sure that that's broken by hand to show you the rest of the spreadsheets. So when I go to the individual summary, this is just like any other dressage show. All those values are carried forward. All the names and all the numbers and all the horse names, if it existed. In this particular test they don't, but in a real test they will be carried forward automatically, and the placings will be shown, and the team points will also be assigned to those riders. There will also be the comments carried forward if there was a tie, how that tie was broken. So the detail of the tie, the score itself, is not shown, but it does say how that tie was broken so that there's a justification for it. You'll notice on this spreadsheet that there is absolutely no blue whatsoever. This spreadsheet is totally automated. There is absolutely nothing to change on this. The only thing that you will want to do with this spreadsheet is to press a print button. The print margins have already been set, so it should spit out the test in the correct format. Very last sheet to look at is the team summary. And here, this spreadsheet calculates, it pulls all the information from the previous tests, and it calculates the team points and figures out who won the show. And as you can see here, we've got all the team names listed across the top. It shows the top 3 scores. Actually, it shows all the scores for, or how many team points were earned by each rider for each school, arranged in descending order. So the highest number will always be on top. In this case, the dummy score of MSU Team A, their 4 riders scored, they scored 3 2s and a 0. The MSU B got 4 3 3. CMU had 2 points and then zeros all the way down. And Finley A scored 7 points and 1 and then 2 zeros. And this doesn't reflect a real show, it's all randomly generated, but it does demonstrate how this scores it. And then it totals up the team points. So in this case, this team had 6 points, this team had 10, this team had 2, this team had 8, so on and so forth. And what it's totaling is the first 3 of the score. It's automatically labeled that there's a drop score. It's displayed just so people can see that it was there, but it is not included in the total. Now, as you're probably familiar, there are ties to be broken on this. Because the criteria, there are many more criteria for breaking team ties and individual ties. That intelligence was not built into the spreadsheet to be invisible with little footnotes the way that the previous tie breaks were done. But the totals are displayed along with the criteria that were used to break those ties. In this case, it's the 3 highest riders' scores, the average score, and then the 3 highest riders' position, aids, harmony, and geometry score, then the 3 highest riders' collective marks, then the position score of the 3rd highest rider. And then that is all totaled up. And what the spreadsheet does automatically do is apply all those criteria and then rank accordingly. So just for example, in this particular show, we did have some ties. Like for example, this particular example is CMU B earned 10 points and Lake Erie College A team, or I'm sorry, Guelph B team both earned 10 points. However, in this case, with the total, as they were, Guelph came out 3rd overall in the show, CMU B was 5th. That must mean that there's another 10-point team out here that, and it looks like it's MSU B in this particular case. There was a 3rd 10-point team in this mix, which needed a tiebreaker to find out where they fell. And in this case, if you look at the tiebreakers, Guelph had the highest overall rider score, the team score as it's described, then MSU B, and then CMU B. And it was very tight for them, but according to the rules, that's how it turned out. Those tiebreakers are on display for everybody to see and to calculate by hand. So that is the total sheet. The one thing that this sheet does not go as far to do is to calculate regional standings. This is show specific. Therefore, if you happen to have mixed teams and you label the mixed teams can earn points and they can earn a show ranking just like any other team. However, the tallying of the regional points is beyond this particular program. So that's everything that I've got for this. I recommend that you download it, you try it, and try to break it. See if you can find any issues with it, and if you do, by all means, let me know and I'll get it fixed. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, thanks for watching.